Happy Friday, everybody. Jules Polonetsky here at FPF, and who's with me? Daniel Barrick, one of our leads on our AI team, and we're going to be talking about AI assessments. But before I do, two things. Daniel's internet seems fine. Weird things seem to be happening with mine. If I cut out, he's going to roll forward. But while I do have you, we've gotten a number of questions about one of the big efforts here at FPF, which was in the media a bit this week. The multi-stakeholder AI policymaker working group. What is this group? This is a group of state legislators, more than 200, and more than state legislators now. It's a policymaker working group. So there are people from the California Privacy Agency, different AG staff. And what the legislators in particular are doing is they're working off model bills, somewhat similar to what you saw in Colorado and Connecticut, for state AI regulation. We agree, certainly here, I do, that a federal AI bill, a federal privacy bill, and then a federal AI bill are necessary. We should not be doing this state by state. It's complicated for companies. It's confusing for consumers. It's absurd. But we don't have one. I hope we'll have a federal privacy bill in the upcoming year. Hopefully Ted Cruz can get it done. We shall see. I don't see us moving a federal AI bill. The administration coming in seems to not want one. It's all about AI leadership, and we certainly think AI leadership and responsible, successful AI needs standards and rules, but it does seem unlikely that we're going to see that on a federal level. State legislators do what they do. They protect the citizens of their state. I was a New York State legislator. If you had come to me and said, don't do bills to protect the people of New York, it should happen at a federal level, I'd say, do you know what my job is? And do you know how I get elected? And do you know what I do every day? I will work on the bills that are most important to the people in my state. So I'd be doing a state AI bill, and I appreciate and recognize that state legislators will and are focused on ensuring that their people are protected. And what's great about the people who have been part of this group is they're not all curmudgeons saying this is terrible. They're all, we get it. We want to see the benefits of AI. We get it. But we understand that if we don't put guardrails in, we ain't going to get the benefits. We're going to get problems and backlash and concern. And so this group, which is led by Connecticut State Senator Maroney, who passed the privacy bill, who passed an AI bill, government didn't sign it, it'll be back. He and many colleagues have been coordinating, learning from each other. A lot of this group is about, keeping up to speed on the rapid pace of developments, learning how other states are thinking about it, and working, which is, I think, the most positive thing, in a common way across very similar models, in a recognition that that's the most efficient way to go forward. We are helping support that group with, frankly, logistics, coordination, helping organize briefings, just sort of staffing it. It is their group, their agenda. We can obviously share thoughts, but they want to hear your thoughts too. And they've been holding listening sessions and taking lots of input. And then, of course, at the end, if anybody takes a bill, they've got to put it in bill language in their state and talk to their local stakeholders and go through that process. So nothing secret, nothing that's not visible. Just legislators trying to learn from each other so that they can be best positioned to advance bills. Okay. Key thing that is in many of the bills that have passed already and that are proposed is assessments, mandates for assessments. But what are these? Are these new kinds of privacy assessments? Are they legal assessments? Well, Daniel and the AI team have done an extensive amount of research to understand the state of these assessments. Why are people doing them? How are they doing? How are they doing them? How's it going? What's working? Where are people having trouble? And so let me hand over to Daniel for this report, which is on our website. So download it and read it. And Daniel's going to give you a bit of an overview right now. Take it away, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Jules, for that. As an excellent transition from legislation to the practical on-the-ground work that companies are doing around identifying and managing AI-related risks. So just by way of context, this our members are trying to effectively identify and manage AI risks, and they wanted to understand how they compared to their peers. So starting in the spring, we began doing research into how companies, based on their public documents, were trying to go about the assessment process. What kinds of common practices were they converging on? And this served as the foundation for a workshop we did in the summer with over 20 different companies to get a sense of where they stood on a variety of different challenges associated with conducting these assessments. And following that, we had one-on-one interviews and other convenings, and in total, we consulted with over 60 companies over the course of this project. And this report is the culmination of that. And so what the report does is it examines the emerging practices, ongoing challenges, and best paths forwards, or areas of work that should be focused on by industry with regards to AI impact assessments. And in terms of some of the key findings that we had, is that organizations typically take 4 steps when conducting AI impact assessments, including initiating the impact assessment, gathering model and system information, assessing risks and benefits, and identifying and testing risk management strategies in order to determine the next course of action for that AI project. The circumstances that can trigger assessments are many and vary, and there's a trend within industry towards conducting multiple AI impact assessments. When gathering model system information, organizations gather a variety of different information, such as details about AI models training, use cases, capabilities, limitations, and guardrails. Typically have internal teams, sometimes dedicated to AI governance, and when relevant, they seek information from third-party model developers and system providers. Although, for reasons I'll discuss right now, many organizations reported to us that they have difficulties obtaining this information from these upstream organizations. But let me provide some context there. So, as some of you may know on this call, many organizations don't develop their own models and systems. Rather, they rely on a third party for those models and systems. But because the organization, therefore, is not close to the development and they don't know how it was developed, how it works, and what safeguards have been put in place, they will often seek information from that third party for relevant details about these things, how it works, what safeguards were put in place. What we found, though, is that organizations typically have a hard time obtaining this information for reasons that I will class into 3 different buckets. There is a technical bucket, there is a proprietary bucket, and then there's like a miscellaneous bucket. And I'll start with the technical. So on the technical side, the size of the data sets on which many of the latest AI models and systems are trained, and the perennial black box problem that I'm sure many of you on this call know, although I'll explain very quickly what it is for those that don't, impede the ability of third parties to share details about how a model and system works downstream. On the black box problem, this is the issue of even developers of an AI model and system may have difficulty explaining the inner workings of how a model system is reaching a particular output. And this can make it hard for them to share that information, therefore downstream, with organizations that use their models or systems. Then there's this proprietary bucket, which what our members said is that sometimes organizations upstream may feel like sharing certain information would constitute sharing their secret source with downstream actors, and therefore they may be hesitant to do it. And finally, there's this miscellaneous bucket. And I don't call it miscellaneous because it's not important. It's very important. And this kind of category of issues regarding information sharing refers to situations where an organization that's using a third-party model or system tries to get details about that model or system from the third party, and they are put in touch with people who are not capable of providing those details. These could be people in the business team, the marketing team, or even other lawyers that just don't do AI governance work and therefore are not in a good position to answer the organization's questions. And another issue is that, as I mentioned, lots of organizations don't develop their own models. They come from specific third parties that some of you on this call may know. And as a result of that, when an organization using a third-party system asks that system provider for details, the system provider themselves may not have got information from the model developer. So these initial information asymmetries further upstream can compound and affect the ability of downstream actors to provide information downstream to other organizations. So that kind of refers to the information asymmetry issue. I will go on a bit more, Jules, if that's okay, to talk about some of the other issues in this report. A growing number of organizations have sought to integrate AI impact assessments into existing enterprise risk management processes, including those around privacy and updated processes for identifying and monitoring risks related to AI, and may escalate AI use cases for review. So kind of starting off with the first point there. So many organizations already have enterprise risk management processes that they've set up for purposes of conducting security assessments or privacy assessments. And as part of those processes, they may already loop in teams throughout the organization to help complete those assessments. Now, one concern that our stakeholders have floated to us numerous times is that in spinning up these AI impact assessment processes, there is a concern that they could be creating more processes that would frustrate the business units, that would frustrate the engineers by duplicating questions, for example. So what some of the more sophisticated companies are starting to do is seek to compare the questions that they have in these existing assessments with those that they would put in the AI assessments to avoid duplication and improve internal stakeholder buy-in. Now, in terms of setting up internal ways of escalating use cases, this is something of an ongoing effort at companies. Not everyone has been able to do this. And what it refers to are situations where a company has an internal committee or council composed of various actors within the organization representing different disciplines who are responsible for receiving escalated AI use cases, typically those that pose a high risk, and determining what kinds of risk mitigation strategies can be implemented to bring down that risk within acceptable thresholds, and determining whether to proceed with an AI use case too. Some of our stakeholders signaled that they had processes in place to escalate those as high risks and high rewards or high benefits to senior leadership within an organization, potentially including a CEO, but it was our understanding that they have not actually done so at this time, but the processes exist for doing so. Now, a challenge that we found that organizations encounter when they are conducting the risk benefit analysis is identifying and measuring the likelihood of particular risks. So starting off at the beginning there with the identification component, it's no secret that there are many different kinds of AI-related risk, and recent research corroborates this. MIT and a bunch of other institutions released a database this summer cataloging over 700 different kinds of AI-related risks. And I think what that reflects is that not only are there lots of risks that organizations need to account for, but based on our own research complementing what MIT did, that many organizations just are not privy to those risks. They may be more focused on some risks related than others. For example, some organizations think they have lots of IP and therefore their assessment processes should be focusing in on managing IP related risks, but that means that other kinds of risks may not receive the same kind of attention. And then there's this other issue of determining the likelihood of risk. So some systems operate in what organizations that we consulted with described as a indeterminate operational environment. And what that means is that they operate in a dynamic theater, which is characterized by changing variables. For example, the user base may change quite significantly over time and at various rates. That's important in terms of being able to assess risk because these variables, these characteristics of these environments can affect the likelihood of a risk materializing. So if it's difficult to anticipate these features of these environments, that can impede organizations' efforts to determine risk. And a more recent issue with being able to assess the likelihood of risk is the fact that some of the more latest and powerful AI models and systems are designed to have multiple use cases. Even though they may have been designed with a particular use case in mind, they may be able to be put towards lots of other use cases. But the fact that it's difficult to determine how likely a particular model or system is going to be utilized for these other use cases can impede organizations' ability to assess for risk. And finally, and then I'll turn it back to you, Jules, when dealing with various kinds of AI-related risks, organizations pursue a myriad of different risk management strategies to address them. It's no secret there's no one-size-fits-all for risk management. Rather, organizations are going to tailor their risk management strategies to the risk that they are dealing with. For example, if an organization identifies hallucinations are an issue with a particular AI system, they may output specific guardrails to lower the likelihood of those hallucinations being outputted by that system. There are several issues, though, that organizations can encounter when trying to measure how effective their risk management strategies have been, however. And the first of these relates to the indeterminate nature of the operational environment that I just talked about, so I won't talk about that further. But there are other kind of specific issues, one of which is that some risks represent subjective values, and they're about whether that risk exists and whether it's been brought within specific thresholds. A good example of this is bias. Bias has many different metrics for assessing it. And that means that organizations may not know which is the appropriate metric to use for assessing the effectiveness of a risk management strategy. And finally, there's the issue kind of on the other end of the spectrum of there not being actually that many metrics, there being a dearth of them. And this is particularly the case in the safety context. And why is this an issue? Well, organizations sometimes feel, based on our consultations with them, that they don't have widely accepted within industry standards for measuring safety-related risks. There are some efforts that are ongoing on these particular issues. ML Commons, I believe, is trying to create a benchmark for safety, but these are ongoing efforts. And I'll close with this. This particular issue, I think, is backed up by recent comments that Director of the US AI Safety Institute at NIST, Elizabeth Kelly, made, where she talked about how industry is still trying to grapple with the best tools for managing safety-related issues and collection with AI models and systems. And therefore, it's very difficult for government at this time to promulgate best practices on how to deal with some of these safety issues. So those are some of the kind of the top-level key takeaways. Thank you for indulging me, Jules, and letting me talk for as long as I did.
Thanks, Daniel. I'd say that what I'm hearing is that on the actual safety pieces, security teams are doing much more of that work, and they've got a history of red teaming and some degree of standardization, and there is work happening at the AI Safety Institute and in other circles on doing more to sort of establish standards for red teaming, standards for assessing security risk. There's a little less on the non-security related risks of AI, and that's where we hear folks who, they can identify which risks are relevant to them, and they can even, do some degree of sort of predicting, but they don't want to be the ones who just do this based on their gut and their stomach. Well, I don't think it's likely to happen, right? They want to work in a way that are standardized. They want to work in a way that shows that what they're doing is in sync with what others are doing. I might be in pharma, and so maybe everything I do is high risk. And well, that doesn't really make sense, right? Well, what are other pharma companies considering high risk, right? People don't want their particular gut to be sort of determining what is or isn't a good enough mitigation, or what is or isn't a good enough risk. So a lot of desire for sort of baselining, comparing, having even some degree of standardization, but not too much, because everybody also, each business is different, each sector is different. Doing a certain kind of profiling or a certain kind of bias might be acceptable in one sector, where it is far more reliable than maybe a human review or the previous current random or machine learning driven review. And now you've got something, driven by an LLM, and it's got bias, but it's, huge improvement over the previous, right? But you need some sort of baseline to use for that. You need some sort of ability to compare what other people are doing, some sort of standardization. But then you do need to say, well, but in my sector, it's a little different. We can accept that because, well, we're just going to be marketing something, movies or something. So is it terrible if it turns out that I'm marketing my love story mostly to people of one demographic or another, right? Like, is that something we, consider a high risk? probably less so than that same algorithm perhaps being used in a way that actually can deny a benefit to someone else. So just a couple of thoughts or reactions. We are keeping an eye on the comments if anybody has a question or so, or thoughts for where we go next. But in fact, let me even turn that question to Daniel. We, I think, identified the report, I think, takes a really good snapshot of where things are today, but also highlights where people are feeling they need more certainty. We heard in some of the roundtables that FPF hosted and at the conference, the AI summit that Daniel and I spoke at the last 2 days, we heard a lot of demand for instance, red teaming standards for the non-security related issues. And by that I mean, do you just sit and go spend hours trying to get the chatbot to say creepy things or give you a coupon that's that's inappropriate or the like, or do you put some more structure sort of around that kind of sort of testing so that it's not just this sort of ad hoc kind of thing? And how do you even maybe automate some of that as opposed to having some analysts use their own creativity? Are there categories of the kinds of things you ought to be looking at? So definitely heard a lot of that, and we're taking a look at whether that's something on our plate. But what is some of the other? Here's what it would be.
Jules, you did cut out there a bit. I think you were asking me, though, kind of what companies looking to enhance their AI impact assessment should consider going forward and consider working on. I can talk more to that. So there are several things that we identify in the report that companies should look at if they want to enhance their AI impact assessments. They should consider inter alia the following. They should enhance their processes for gathering information from third-party model developers and system vendors, such as by streamlining the number of questions they ask. They should connect with practitioners at the third party who are capable of providing relevant details about how a model or system works, how it's created, what safeguards they've put in place and tests they've done, and when appropriate, identifying alternatives to the third party's model or system. I think another thing, and I think this complements one of Jules's points quite nicely, is that there needs to be an improvement around internal education concerning the multitude of AI risks that can arise, recognizing that these risks can context and emerge at different points in the AI lifecycle. And as Jules was pointing out, some risks may be more pertinent to certain industries than others. So that's worth considering too. And finally, I think industries should seek to devise and enhance measurements for risk management strategies effectiveness, such as by benchmarking against each other companies' approaches and assessing these strategies' effectiveness over time. As I noted at the end of my last point, these are very much ongoing efforts. There are private efforts underway to try and develop some of these measurement benchmarks, but this is a piece of ongoing work.
Yeah, and clearly, you highlighted some of the frustration people are having getting information up and down from vendors. The big vendors are serving thousands of companies. They need to do a bit more to put out some more detail. And, to the extent that someone can provide that information, the entire industry has accepted a bit of risk that, the big foundation models, got all their data, legally, and some of them are indemnifying and all that sort of thing. But you have this odd situation where people are comfortable using, the underlying trained models from the major foundation model companies, and companies who are themselves looking to train on their own data and who are asking users or telling users, or maybe say updating their privacy policies to say, hey, we want to disclose more clearly that we're training, models based on your data. They're getting consumer pushback. And, you have to recognize that. We can't tell consumers, hey, you're wrong. Consumers are, being when being told or being asked, they're sort of saying, hey, we're not comfortable with this. And so you've got companies either backing down or trying to do it on an opt-in basis, which is hard to scale, or getting consumers upset, and but then using these big models where obviously people did not, in a way that brings consumers along into this process and better explains what the value equation is.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to follow up with. Oh, sorry. Yes. Let's see.
When it comes to identifying stakeholders, what are we hearing from organizations about that process?
So when we were speaking with organizations about the kinds of entities or groups that they consult with as part of the AI impact assessment process, the short answer is it varies quite considerably. I think when they're thinking internally about which teams to involve, some of the common denominators that we heard are going to be privacy teams, security teams, various AI ethics teams and data teams, legal and risk compliance. And of course, we can't forget the business units that are involved in leading an AI project. They are consulted quite significantly as part of the assessment process. One, because they are typically closest to the business decisions, going to be privy to information that these other teams that I rattled off are not going to be privy to.
And Daniel, if John's question was about external impacted stakeholders, not the internal people at the company, obviously the biggest companies or maybe people doing specific projects affecting a particular community, can and should be, reaching out. I think the challenge is for others who don't have a direct line to the people that are going to be impacted. I think, we need to sort of scale some of that so that the kinds of organizations that represent people that are impacted are in a more collective way having some voice. Let's say we've got organizations who are, hey, we should have self-driving cars because they're going to, and yes, they may cause some accidents, but they're going to improve safety in such a significant way. Where are the groups that represent the pedestrians? If it's, hey, I'm going to market more effectively to different ethnic groups, so I need sensitive data. Okay, and I don't have the ability to go put together a civil rights coalition of my own, right? We need to figure out how to better, in a more collective way, have review boards, have sort of more communal, broad ways where we can say, this is actually what experts who speak for children or speak for parents authentically believe. Right now, people are showing up and they're arguing this in a public policy, sphere, and the people who are actually, impacted aren't the ones who are saying, no, I don't want you to have my sensitive data. Yeah, you're going to market to me more effectively. I think there's too much risk there, right? Or, no, this is about health equity. I do want you to have this data because I want you to cure this disease, and I'm in that population that needs to be impacted. So depending on where you are going on that. Peter flags that a lot of guidance is sort of one size fits all, and could not agree more. What we're focused on going forward a bit is, I want to compare risks with the other people in pharma. I want to compare risks with the other people in my sector. Does it make sense for one group to turn down, one particular thing that goes on and wins prizes for, great advances in science, and another one, gets turned down because somebody was a bit more conservative? We need to do this by sector because the risks and the benefits, let's not forget the benefits, accepting a certain risk should take into account what the benefit is to the people who are affected or to the broader society. And when this is only risks, of course, you should have no risk. But when it's, or if it's just risk and only profit, well, maybe there's an economic argument, but you have to really make your case. But when you actually can show a benefit to the users and society, and how do we measure benefit? That's a little more challenging.
Yeah, so no, I second everything that you just said, Jules, about kind of the need for a sector by sector approach, particularly when we're talking about high risk. I would say that as part of the report, one of the things that we learnt about as we were consulting with members is that for certain areas, and some of the attendees may not know of this, particularly those that may think of the US kind of AI legal system as a bit of a desert with nothing there, is that some sectors are particularly high regulated. So the financial sector in particular has lots of different rules that impact AI models and systems, even though those particular rules may not have been conceived with AI in mind. So some examples are FICRA, ECOA, that are enforced by a plethora of different agencies, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB as its friends call it, and a bunch of other prudential regulators like the OCC. They all have skin in the game. And I think something that organizations should be privy of is that there may be sector-specific rules that, even though they weren't designed with AI in mind, may have impacts on those technologies. To give you like a more granular example of this, in the financial sector, the CFPB published a circular concerning kind of the use of algorithms in lending and its intersections with FICRA. And they went into very specific details about kind of what explainability means in the context of adverse action notices. So there's a lot of kind of regulatory activity in some sectors. I think it's incumbent on organizations to be privy to it, particularly in these high risk areas.
We have taken the half an hour that we promised to you, and it's Friday and it's December, and you have employee reviews or holiday parties and stuff like that. So Daniel, thank you. Read the report. It's really good. Kudos to the team. Suggestions for more we ought to be doing in the space. We're all ears. Let's just do a quick. Carolina at BFBM says, external stakeholders, impacted individuals, participatory governance. Again, the biggest companies, yes. Broader, we've done work over the years on how one might set up review boards. Again, hard to scale that if you're not one of the biggest organizations. One of our thoughts is that we need external review boards where there may be sort of standing pools of experts that could, frankly, also be pulled from different representative communities. How do you put together a board that includes computer scientists who also understand, LGBTQ issues, who are also seniors, right? I mean, there's just very specific communities that we often need included, and it's not like the groups that are out there today have all this time to just go show up and consult, right? I mean, they're out there advocating, doing what they're doing, or they're average citizens going about their business. So one of the things that we've been interested in is can one create sort of an expert pool so that you can, in a confidential way, bring something to a external committee that gives you representative feedback. We've got that on hold today. We were looking to do it a couple of years ago, driven mostly by sort of privacy issues. Maybe AI will be the driver. If it's of interest, ping us, and we'd love to sort of consider whether it's timely to restart something like that again. Thanks, Daniel. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for your interest and questions, and please download the report.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers, Jules.